So today, kiddies, we're reviewing the OnePlus Nord CE5, a more affordable alternative to the regular Nord 5, starting at just 299 of your British pounds. But OnePlus has sliced and diced a few wee features for this budget blower. So is it still solid value for money? Well, I've had my SIM secreted in there for a week now, using it as my full-time phone. So here's my OnePlus Nord CE5 review, Hungover Edition. And for more on the latest and greatest tech, please do poke subscribe, ding that notifications bell. Cheers. I know it was a bit crap. Cheers. Oh, I need some paracetamol. Now, first up, with its 6.77-inch display and not exactly chunky, but not exactly slender bezels, the Nord CE5 is certainly a proper hand filler. Although thankfully it is quite skinny as well, so not uncomfortable to clutch. And you've got yourself a choice of two different colours, Black Infinity or Marble Mist. The marble one is my favourite, even if this marbly sort of pattern always just reminds me of my nan's bathroom tiles. But at least it's got a bit more going on for it than the black version, which is pretty straightforward, quite simple. I mean, it's not exactly going to blow your bollocks off, is it? Or indeed explode your tits if you're sans bollocks. You've got yourself a glass back and a plastic frame, fairly standard stuff again for this sort of price point. Pre-installed screen protector, and this phone is IP65 splash and dust resistant. It's not full-on water resistant like some of its rivals, although it can still get pretty bloody moist to be fair. And of course you've got OxygenOS 15 slapped on here, complete with 4 OS updates and 6 years of security patching. And that's the same as what OnePlus offers for the regular Nord 5, and it's not the most generous around, but it's pretty damn good for a £300 phone. I mean, 6 years is probably as long as you're going to want to keep this thing. And you'll enjoy those same gloriously smooth OxygenOS animations as usual, with only the occasional slight judder when you're flicking between apps or something. That's pretty rare. However, gotta say, most of this past week I spent ruining the many features that the Nord CE5 simply lacks compared with more expensive OnePlus phones and also other mid-range rivals. One of the most obvious omissions is of course that plus key, which has been brutally axed from the regular Nord 5 for this CE model. And this was quite a handy way of flipping between different notification modes or activating Do Not Disturb, where you could also tweak it to do a few other things. Here on the Nord CE5 you have to switch modes and activate Do Not Disturb by poking the screen like a proper pleb. Gugh. More annoying is the complete lack of an always on display, despite the fact that the Nord CE5 insists it really does have one. But it's not exactly an always on display if I actually have to poke and prod you to display it, is it? Phone? And there's also bugger all eSIM support on here, which, you know, fair enough, it's still not exactly common on £300 smartphones, but still pretty annoying when you have to bugger off abroad somewhere where your data package isn't supported. Oh, and this £300 model comes with just 128 gigs of storage, but hallelujah, that is expandable via micro SD in that second SIM slot. And in happier news, some of the better bits of OxygenOS are present and correct here on the Nord CE5, including a pretty dense gaming mode and of course good old Zen space for when you want the entire world to just sod right off, which frankly is my default state these days. And you've also got that new Mindspace feature, which works in a very similar way to the likes of Google Screenshots, the Nothing Essential space, etc., just allowing you to quickly capture and store away information and then find it again later. Now, not much to moan about when it comes to the Nord CE5's 6.77-inch AMOLED screen. This Full HD Plus panel may not be quite as crispy as some mid-range rivals, but it's still more than sharp enough for editing pics or enjoying some cinematic experiences, or just silly cartoons on Netflix. You've got HDR10 streaming support, and while those colours could perhaps be a bit more poppy on the default vivid mode, they're not exactly lacking in vibrancy either. The screen is easily bright enough to see what's going on when you're outdoors on a sunny day, even when you're wearing shades, despite reportedly being a lot less bright than the Nord 5. The auto brightness was occasionally a bit too bright in the evenings, but you've got the usual eye comfort features, as well as PWM dimming, while the refresh maxes out at 120Hz. And you've got those Aqua Touch smarts as well, which I've barely even tested this past week, as the UK seems to have gone a bit mental and decided that we're actually having a heat wave. But look, this does work, so you're all set for when normality returns and we're all soaked to our Y-fronts every time we step outside, and not from sweat. However, unfortunately, there is plenty to moan about when it comes to the audio, because the Nord CE5's mono speaker setup is rather crap. This singular bottom-mounted blaster tries to make up for its audio deficiencies by being louder than Satan's moaning bowel movement. But unfortunately, on louder volumes, the sound spaffed out by the CE5 is simply not pleasant to the lugs at all. As for the performance, well, the brains of the operation here is a new one on me, MediaTek's Dimensity 8350 Apex. And that is backed by 8 gigs of RAM, so everyday running absolutely fine, and I did test it out with a good bit of Wuthering Waves action as usual. And on the regular visual settings, the Nord CE5 coped pretty fine, maintaining that 30 frames per second performance for the majority of my gaming session. Although if you do jack up the visuals and try boosting the frame rate to 60 frames per second, well, you'll notice that it'll start to fatigue rather quickly. A frame rate fluctuating around 30 to 45 frames per second was the standard, so not bad at all. Still reasonably smooth, but with the occasional stumble along the way, and quite noticeable drops in that frame rate. And OnePlus has also squashed in a whopping great vapor chamber over 7,000 square millimeters, but despite this, the Nord CE5 does still get rather warm under a proper bit of pressure, although not so hot that it's actually uncomfortable to clutch, or it balks the performance, mercifully. But of course, no such woes if you are gaming on the likes of Call of Duty, PUBG, and less intensive fare. The connectivity has been fine, a couple of wee dropouts in that reception when I was walking to the station on a couple of occasions, but generally it's good enough to stream video as you're moving about. And OnePlus has stuffed a 5200 mAh capacity battery inside of here, which is pretty standard these days. And I found that most days I would finish with around a quarter of the battery life remaining. That's with roughly 5 to 6 hours of screen on time, plenty of mixed use, lots of web browsing, messaging, video streaming, plenty of Spotify streaming in the background usually. But if I did do a bit of video chatting, a bit of gaming, or just basically use the camera quite a lot, then that pretty much fully drained it by the end of the day. There are certainly more impressive mid-range mobiles out there for the battery life, and if you are gaming, you can expect around 3.5 to 4 hours of Wuthering Waves action on a full charge before it's completely drained. Good news is you've got 80 watt SuperVOOC fast charging when you bung a cable in this thing, so the Nord CE5 does not take long to charge back up again. Great news if you need to give it a quick boost in the 10 minutes before you bugger off to town or whatever. Although, like many £300 budget-friendly smartphones, there's bugger all support for wireless charging. And so let's conclude this rather lovely OnePlus Nord CE5 review, the squint at the old camera tech. And what you've got here is a pretty basic, straightforward dual lens setup. The first shooter is a 50 megapixel Sony LYT600 sensor, and that is backed by your basic 8 megapixel ultra wide angle shooter. You've got all the usual camera modes on here, bit of portrait, action, high res mode if you want to shoot at the full 50 megapixels, and yes, you do get a dedicated pro mode as well, although no way of shooting raw in this, certainly not that I've managed to find. But I stuck with the general auto mode like most people will do, and yeah, the OnePlus Nord CE5 does tend to brighten images in an iPhone-y kind of way, which does often slightly saturate the scene and mean that vibrant subjects aren't quite as vividly realised. But to be honest, most people will likely be happy enough with the results. The Nord CE5 copes pretty well with softer lighting as well as nasty contrast, and it can just about handle subjects that won't keep still, although not particularly in low light, and obviously you do have some limitations when it comes to night photography. As for that basic 8 megapixel ultra wide angle shooter, this is simply fine. It's there for an alternative viewpoint if you want to spice things up a bit. But unlike a couple of rivals like the Nothing Phone 3A, there's no telephoto action, only digital cropping. And of course, dive into OnePlus's Photos app and you've got the usual AI editor smarts. And some of these are better than others. The AI de-blur tool, for instance, doesn't really tend to do much unless it's only a tiny bit of blur. You've got the likes of recompose, which you can basically just crop into your shots in different ways. AI eraser, which can be used to just get rid of people, which is always handy. And so here, for instance, we can remove absolutely everyone from the crowd and even the DJ guy. So it looks like basically I was on a private performance. Obviously, occasionally bulky. I don't know what's happened to AJ Tracy's leg there, for instance. It's just disappeared into the stage. You can also shoot 4K resolution video at 30 or 60 frames per second. This is absolutely fine for your simple shareable home movies, etc. Visuals reasonably crisp, though obviously nighttime shooting again quite limited. The audio pickup's fine, so yeah, not too shabby. And around front you've got yourself a 16 megapixel selfie shooter. And this does max out at 1080p Full HD resolution when it comes to your video shenanigans, although at 30 or 60 frames per second it's absolutely fine for video chatting. Everyone I was speaking to had no problems hearing me, even when I was stood a fair distance from the phone, etc. And there you have it, my lovelies. That in a tasty wee nutshell is the OnePlus Nord CE5. Not a bad wee blower for a £300 budget, although as I say, I spent a lot of my time with this phone just ruining some of the features that it was perhaps missing out on. And it didn't quite butter my crumpet in the same way that something like a Nothing Phone 3A did, for instance. That said, you know, OxygenOS is still rather lovely despite some of those missing features. Nice and slick and smooth. The performance is pretty good. The display, lovely stuff. It's a shame about the mono speaker setup. And the camera performance absolutely fine as well. So it'd be great to hear your thoughts on the OnePlus Nord CE5 down in the comments below. I have fully compared the CE5 and the regular Nord 5, so go check out that video if you want to see a bit of side-by-side fondly action and how they really stack up. Please do poke, subscribe and ding that notifications bell for more on the latest and greatest tech. And have yourselves a really wonderful rest of the week. Cheers everyone, love you all. Alright, really must get that paracetamol now.